I think it's about time that we kick it off. What do you think? Yay! We want to start on time, we want to finish on time, right? My name is Elsha Zwart, and I'm the Executive Director of Gloucester 400 Plus, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all this evening for a panel discussion, the second in our series of the future of Gloucester, the future of climate change. And Maureen Aylward is going to be our moderator. She's right over here, and we'll introduce the panel. Thanks so much for coming, Maureen.
Thank you so much. As Elsha said, I'm Maureen Aylward, the Executive Director of Town Green, and I would like to say first thank you to Isabel Pett, the event director for the Gloucester 400 Plus. She has been the steward of getting this event pulled together, so I really appreciate you. Thank you so much, Isabel. Just a little something about Town Green before we start the panel. Town Green provides climate awareness education for the people of Cape Ann. We're going to be impacted by climate change. This is true, and we've got some maps back there we'll address later on, but we're going to hear from our panel in a moment. Town Green offers webinars, on-location field trips, as well as we host open forums online, and we're going to be doing some neighborhood workshops in 2024, so please take a look out for them. We have a podcast called Nature Wins. We just started it. We recorded episode 2 last night with Eric Hutchins. And if you want to follow us on Spotify, you can do that. Thank you so much for that. Just a few thank yous to the Gloucester 400 Plus Committee. Thank you for hosting us and bringing this to the wider Gloucester audience. And also, many thanks to Sarah Sleefer-Swift for hosting us here at Magma. Thank you, Sarah. And to the Town Green sponsors that help to make our work possible, Common Crow Natural Market, Bombco, Cape Ann Savings Bank, and Neptune's Harvest. Thank you very much to them. Now to our panel. I'm going to introduce everyone on the panel as they're seated, and then I'll get into some questions and we can kick it off. First is Dr. Jane Knott. Jane is the founder and president of Hydro Predictions, an environmental consulting firm specializing in groundwater hydrology, groundwater remediation, and climate change adaptation. She has authored several scientific journal articles on climate change adaptation for coastal road infrastructure and on the impacts of climate change on water resources. She is on Town Green's Board of Directors and on the Charles River Watershed Board of Advisors. Jane holds a PhD in Civil and Environmental Engineering from UNH and a Master's in Civil and Environmental Engineering from MIT. Tonight, Jane is going to speak on sea level rise and its threats to road infrastructure in Cape Ann, and she will also lead the interactive activity later tonight with the maps that you've been seeing back there. Next is Eric Hutchins. He's a NOAA biologist. He's been working on several coastal ecological restoration projects from the Piscataway River in Maine all the way down to Cape Cod. Eric has been involved in over 50 dam removal projects and is leading he is the lead NOAA representative for the $5.38 million DOJ settlement with National Grid for pollution liability in Gloucester Harbor. To become a habitat restoration biologist, Eric earned a bachelor's degree in science fisheries biology at UMass Amherst and a master's degree in marine affairs from the University of Rhode Island. And Eric will address biodiversity loss on Cape Ann and how ecological restoration can help. Velia Rinn is a sophomore at Gloucester High School. She's currently working with the GHS Youth Advisory Council to address climate change issues in the school. Velia has been a climate activist from an early age, and she is the youth voice on our panel this evening. Tucker. Tucker Smith is co-owner of Cedar Rock Gardens in West Gloucester, a local farm that provides fresh produce to local restaurants, stores, and to the community. and they have orders online. I know that Thanksgiving is around the corner. Tucker will help us to understand how farmers are experiencing climate change and what that means for our local food system. And our snacks tonight are provided via Tucker, the carrots out front picked today, by the way. And last is Evan Lawler, who is a senior consultant with Kazalt Solar. He started with the company about 8 years ago. He's designed and installed over 500 commercial and residential solar systems on Cape Ann. He has worked with deep energy retrofits for Boston Green Building and as a home energy advisor with Next Step Living. Evan attended UMass for construction management with a focus on sustainable building, and he will talk about renewable energy and the energy transition that is underway. So welcome our panelists. After our panel discussion, which will be about 30 minutes or so, we will have a Q&A session and will allow you to make comments, ask questions, and then after that, we are going to have an interactive activity that Jane Knott is going to lead us. So to kick us off, Jane, the first one comes to you. You've done a lot of work in groundwater research. And can you tell us how groundwater is going to be impacted by climate change? Give us the real deal here.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I want to welcome everybody. It's really great to see so many people here, and I want to thank the Gloucester 400 Plus group for hosting this. So, like Maureen said, my work has been really focused on water, surface water, but mainly on groundwater. And I've taken a look at really the effects of sea level rise on groundwater in coastal communities. So that's really important for Gloucester and for the Cape Ann area. Not many people think about groundwater. Groundwater is underground. It's out of sight, but it's very important for communities, for drinking water. But it's also a problem for things like underground infrastructure, road infrastructure. When you build roads, you want to make sure that the water is not in the base layers of the roads because that weakens the pavement structure. So in coastal roads like what we have in Rockport and Gloucester and the greater Cape Ann area and really all up and down the coast, with sea level rise, groundwater also rises. So in the coastal roads, as the groundwater rises up underneath the pavement, it weakens the pavement. And the pavement systems break down sooner than they were designed for. And then, of course, when you get flooding situations from sea level rise or from storm surge, you get more damage to the roads. The roads are weaker. They tend to break down much quicker. You get a lot more damage. The same thing can happen with underground infrastructure, with the water pipes and sewer pipes and stormwater systems. As groundwater rises with sea level rise, our DPWs are having to deal with more water issues. So that's it, basically. We can talk more about it later.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jane. I will come back to you because I want to talk about some other issues around sea level rise. Next question is for Valia. Actually, let's get you heard right away. You're doing work at Gloucester High School with the Youth Advisory Council. You've been interested in climate for a long time. Tell us what you're most concerned about for your future.
Well, I know that Gloucester High School is right on the ocean, if any of you have seen it. And a lot of the sports fields lie right up to the edge. There's like next to the football field, it's like marshy area, and I play softball, and that field is right up to the water. And one of my concerns is when the sea level rises and flooding happens, and it'll just completely flood these fields that these amazing athletes won't be able to play on anymore. And there's really nowhere else to put those fields. A lot of the land is really hilly. So that's one of my biggest concerns around like that, is just the flooding of the sports fields.
I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
So inside Gloucester High School, of course, every high school has its own culture. Mm-hmm. But what are people talking about in terms of culture? Like, I know that fast fashion is really popular, but we know that fast fashion is not so great for the environment, right? And what about thrifted culture? What about, like, upcycle fashion?
Yeah, it definitely like feels better to wear like a big name brand. And you just constantly hear everybody talking about, like Nike or Brandy Melville or like these really big brands that are just not helping the climate at all by like producing just a lot of like clothes. And it feels like you can't like fit in really well if you say, oh, I got this from Second Glance, or oh, I got this at Savers. You don't hold the same status. And it's just really like, it's such a weird social feeling. And it just makes me like realize how like we should normalize wearing a completely thrifted outfit. Like that should be the cool thing. The cool thing should be like wearing thrifted clothes or upcycled clothes. And like not bragging about how you spent tons of money on this pair of jeans that the denim and all those dyes are getting washed away into rivers and oceans.
Yeah, thanks, Phalia. I'm getting some claps there. Well, just to go to talk about the athletic fields, and for all the panelists, just jump in if you have a comment or you want to add on to somebody's answer. But it's groundwater too, right? I mean, the fields are going to be inundated.
So they've put up a new seawall, essentially, along the athletic fields. And that's good because that stops the water from the river overflowing the banks and into the athletic fields. But you also have to remember that with sea level rise, the groundwater is also rising. So even though the surface water gets blocked by that seawall, you're still going to get the rising groundwater behind the wall, flooding in some areas.
Eric.
Yeah, I got to add to that.
I can tell.
And for those of you who don't know, the entire Gloucester High School was built on a salt marsh. It was actually a salt marsh that then was a dump. That was the refuse dump for the city of Gloucester. Then they built a school on top of the dump. So underneath that ball field is a bunch of refuse, which is not the greatest either to get inundated by groundwater or seawater, to actually start having infiltration of water moving around in it.
Yeah, Eric, since you're holding the mic, I'm just going to ask you a question. So you're a resident of Rockport. You wear two hats, your NOAA hat and your resident Rockport hat.
Graduated high school in Gloucester, so I wear that hat too.
Oh, yeah, don't forget that.
1980.
Since we're talking about climate change impact on biodiversity with you, tell me what you're seeing out there. Tell me what you're most concerned about. What should our audience hear about?
Well, from the work that I do, salt marsh restoration and dam removals, trying to promote migratory fish, probably one of the things that I see around the Cape Ann area or worry about the most is with sea level rise, a lot of our coastal wetlands won't have anywhere to go. That's a real big issue. Is, you think of Thatcher Road, you think of houses along the Annisquam River. People, I don't live on the ocean, but many of you do, people are gonna protect their property line, and they already have. The highway departments protect their property line. Salt marshes and coastal wetlands can migrate with sea level rise. They have for millennia, millions of years, but not when there's a wall. So that's going to be one of the big issues, is all the walls we've built over the past 400 years. And the salt marshes are tremendously productive for juvenile fish. And if you're anywhere from Cape Ann, fish is important. Fish fish supports our whale watch industry. Fish supports our recreational fishing. The baby fish support our commercial fishing. It is a big part of Cape Ann, is shell fishing, commercial fish, recreational fish, and to feed the animals that are out there. These nursery areas are inevitably going to be shrinking because they can't migrate. Like the Gloucester High School, I went to the high school, but that was a salt marsh. It would have technically migrated up onto Centennial Avenue. It's not going to have the ability to migrate anymore. So that's one of the big issues with a couple feet of sea level rise, because those coastal wetlands in many cases will not live under those depths of water. They will become mudflats or subtidal, but we will have a net loss. And that's a big worry up and down the East Coast for biodiversity of our marine system, is we're going to lose this interface between the ocean and the uplands.
Eric, and one more thing for you. Could you just mention the lobster study that just came out?
Yeah, it was just a few weeks ago, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries announced it, for any of you that didn't pick it up, but there's in fisheries management, you do indexes. You try to do the best you can to figure out how many fish are out there. But in the Gulf of Maine last year, they detected a 40% reduction in young of the year lobsters in the Gulf of Maine on one of their indices. Not to say that's going to happen 2 years in a row, but it's certainly a wake-up call. Because lobsters, for example, it wasn't that long ago. I used to be a port agent collecting data for the National Marine Fisheries Service in Point Judith, Rhode Island. There was a major commercial fishery for lobsters in Long Island Sound. It doesn't exist today. In my lifetime, that fishery's gone, and it's converting over to blue crabs. So things are absolutely changing, but a 40% reduction in young of the year, I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but if it happens 2 or 3 years in a row, that's a big hit on an industry that's extremely important to Rockport, Gloucester, as well as Manchester and Essex. There's commercial fishermen and recreational in all 4 of our communities.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Eric. Tucker, here's a question for you, since we're sort of talking about food. What are you seeing on your farm, the effects of climate change on the farm? I mean, from the drought last year to heavy rains, the rainy season that we had this summer. Could you give us some examples of what are you seeing on the farm?
Well, for instance, today was actually a good day for climate change in for my industry. I was outside today harvesting lettuce that hadn't froze yet, and in a t-shirt. So my growing season has extended farther into the fall, and I'm able to get out into the fields earlier in the spring, so we have a longer growing season here. But there is a lot of variability in the weather, which is hard to mitigate, where about, 3 years ago, we had a lot of rain, an abnormal amount. Then we went to an extreme drought last summer, and now we've had an abnormal amount of rain. I guess the Ipswich River is at its highest record level that it's ever been recorded at this time of year. And so this variability of weather patterns is something that I've been talking to some other farmers around the country, and they're taking a bunch of different measurements to alleviate that. I was talking to a farmer out in Indiana that's putting in tile drains, and he put in tile drains on 1,000 acres in Indiana.
What are they?
Where are they?
What are tile drains?
A tile drain is a pipe, landscape pipe that runs about 36 inches down in the soil. And what it does is water will collect, your ground level water will collect in there, and that allows it to seep through that pipe and exit the field into their county ditches that they have, or into creeks. And so they're able to mitigate extreme amounts of high water by having these drains in their field and getting that water out of their field. So there's different techniques that farmers are using to cope with massive amounts of water, but there's a lot of farms that don't maybe have the finances for that. We're seeing this past year all of the flooding that happened up and down the Connecticut River out in the western part of the state, and up through Vermont, and a lot of those farms were completely devastated. And luckily there's been some outreach and funding for those farms in the fall here, but to mitigate these extreme weather events, you're having to put in a lot of capital to try and mitigate that, but you really don't know what's coming.
Are you able to do any of that mitigation at Cedar Rock?
Yeah, so at Cedar Rock, we do a lot of manipulation of our growing conditions where we've put in a lot of greenhouses. The greenhouses allow us to keep water off of our crops. They allow us to heat the crops passively from the sun, where it just traps in that heat from the sun during the day, as well as it allows us to stretch shade cloth over our fields if we have extreme heat. Or over the greenhouse, but we also will be we've been modifying our systems and looking at other regions of the world that experience these kind of weather patterns. So we've been having a lot of shade cloth on hand in case we have extreme heat, where a lot of southern growers in southern United States will run shade cloth over their fields to actually drop the temperature of the field itself and protect it from the sun. I was talking to a potato farmer out in Idaho as well this week to prepare for this event, and a lot of those potato growers will make sure that they have really good irrigation, so when there's a temperature spike, they actually cool their crop down with water, and that water will bring those potato temperatures back down. If you have extreme temperatures higher than 84 when a potato plant is flowering, what you'll do is get a reduced tuber rate, so it won't set as many potatoes in the ground. And so if you don't have that technology to mitigate those extreme temperatures, then you can lose your potato crop.
Thanks, Tucker. Jane has a comment.
This is really interesting. I'm fascinated with when he started talking about the changing season, the changing length in the season, the fact that it's warmer longer. It's also spring is coming earlier, so we're getting a shrinking of the winter season. We did a study really looking at the effect of this on roads, which isn't as interesting as farms by any means. But we're seeing a lot more of this freeze-thaw cycle that we never saw before. And you probably have noticed that there's a lot more potholes. So, you know, you get the very cold day, and then you get the 40-degree day, and then it goes down to, 2, and then it goes back up to 45. And, when I was a child, we didn't really have that very often. And we're seeing that a lot more often today. And of course, the changing seasons, the shortening of the winter also is going to cut back on the amount of snowpack we have, which is really important from a hydrologist point of view. That's the water that recharges our aquifers, that recharges our reservoirs. So it's important that we pay attention to these changes in our seasons.
Thanks, Jane. Do you have another?
One thing I'd like to point out too, it's a really, what you're talking about there, Jane, is really worrisome when you have those temperature fluctuations in the winter. We all saw it this year, or maybe didn't taste it, where we didn't have a peach crop here in the north because of a temperature spike in January and in February, where those buds broke and then it froze again and they lost all of their peaches. And so if you don't have consistent cold periods for a lot of the perennial crops that we grow up here in the north, well then, we might not be able to grow them. So a lot of farmers that I talk to, they're diversifying their crops to try and mitigate that concern.
Thanks. Evan, I have a question for you. So we are in the midst of a great energy transition, and 500 folks and businesses have decided to put solar on their roofs through Casalt. But, from your perspective and your expertise in this area, how's the transition going? What's realistic to expect on Cape Ann?
I think that's dependent on a lot of things, but what we're hearing up here is everything is directly correlated to, we're talking about a lot of sea level rising, which is directly correlated with the global warming, which is directly correlated with fossil fuel being burned. So it's one of those things where these are all the issues, solar and other sustainable energy sources are potentially, what can help those issues and alleviate the temperature rise and alleviate the groundwater rise. And so people are getting on board, I think solar was pretty daunting. It's pretty, at first it was like, does it really work? A lot of people were questioning it. People just didn't think it was real. There were a lot of, ways of it kind of not being a scam, but not being the best investment for you, right? But things are turning around where it's now a much better investment. People are able to do it with whether it's low interest loans, things like that. And then on a larger scale, we need to, get on board as far as National Grid, Eversource. They need to be ready to update their infrastructure to be able to handle more sustainable building and sustainable energy. So
Are you talking about the grid?
the grid itself.
Strengthening the
I
grid
mean,
itself?
So the way to alleviate all these issues is to stop burning as much fossil fuels. But in order to do that, you're going to see a lot of people switching over to heat pumps and switching over to heating and cooling with electric, which is great. But if you just decide to stop burning oil and start cranking your electricity and you don't have solar, you're just asking Salem to burn more fossil fuels. So you're not actually doing anything. I mean, it's getting in the grid's then needing to source that. While there are a lot more opportunity to source it from solar fields and things like that, we need to continue doing that. There needs to continue to be incentives for businesses and even like the city has how many stranded assets that are just roofs that just nothing's going on them, and there should be solar on them.
Yeah, so
Obviously-
what, that's a good example of like, what can a city do, a municipality do, what can a business do, what can folks do to help make that transition? Because as you mentioned, it's daunting. There's a lot of moving parts, and
it's an investment, and it's an investment to our future. It's an investment to have the football field not flood. It's an investment to do these things to maintain this city and I mean all cities, but if we're focusing on here, we don't want to lose these key assets that we have that's gotten us to where we are today. So really it's a matter of investing in that infrastructure and investing in solar and grants. I mean, Tucker just signed a grant right here for us to install solar at Cedar Rock. So we're going to be doing a ground mount at Cedar Rock, this is through the Department of Agriculture. They have a huge grant, and Tucker's going to apply for the grant, and we have many more people that are going to be applying for this grant, which will give you 50% of their project cost.
that's great.
So you can get 50% grant, 30% federal tax credit, some more depreciation tax credit, and he can pay 10%, 15% of the cost and have a return on investment of like 2 years.
Tucker, could you just comment on that? Like, what's been your experience, and what are you looking forward to? How will you integrate solar? What will it help with at the farm?
Yes, so at the farm we use a lot of electricity for circulation fans and for refrigeration and storage of food. And so it's been our goal since we began to be as environmentally friendly as possible. The first 10 years we decided we're going to grow our business, have it be economically sustainable, and then the next 10 years here we're turning to be environmentally sustainable. So when we're working with Evan, we were talking about designing a solar array. Now National Grid has a handicap so that a certain property can't produce too much electricity. They can't produce it over a certain kilowatts of power, and my mother has already consumed that allotted amount with her roof on her house and her barn. And so we're waiting for the state to pass to allow us to actually put up a solar array on the same property. And so National Grid is kind of dragging their feet, as they make updates, or who knows why they're dragging their feet. And then for us, a big debate for us was whether or not to put in a battery pack. for this, and we decided not to do a battery pack at this point. We're hoping that the technology will advance itself a little bit more, and they can work out some kinks, but I'm just always a little fearful of like first generation systems, and would like to buy a battery pack probably in like 2 or 3 years. Because it's one thing to produce the energy and send it back into the grid, but how do you store that energy so you're actually becoming neutral is going to be a big concern, I think, for businesses as well as towns.
Thanks, Tucker. Thanks, Evan. Jane, do you have Eric, Valia, do you have anything to add? Okay. Valia, this question is for you because we've just been talking a lot about what we're doing and what we can see in the future, but the name of this panel is The Future of Gloucester. So when you think about your future, what do you see? You know, there's a lot, you're in the midst of a transition, and as we all are, and you know, change is exactly what happens every day. But I'm just curious about your perspective on the things that you've just heard from the panel. Give us your thoughts on some future thoughts for you.
Yeah, it's definitely like fascinating to hear all these changes that are happening around us, and I think one of my main wants for the future, sort of, to kickstart my generation being able to do things like these amazing people do, is more education on the like dilemmas, you know, because I know that like everyone knows climate change is happening. Everyone knows there's a hole burning in the ozone layer, and everyone knows the sea level is going to rise, but we don't know what can we do to slow that down. What can we, you know, what's happening around us, like the groundwater and the salt marshes, all that stuff. Like nobody in my generation really knows that, and I think that it like, I feel as though it's really important to sort of educate people my age about stuff like that, because it's fascinating and it's scary and it's a thing that's happening. And I do think that's a big part of the future for me, is just like knowing that so we can make it better.
If you could wave a wand around the curriculum at Gloucester High School for maybe the junior year, because you're almost done with your sophomore year, what would you add? What do you want to see at Gloucester High School in terms of climate change education?
Yeah, well, I know the science is a required class that you're supposed to take, but I would definitely want to add a environmental aspect to biology, or have environmental science as a required thing, because it is an option, but it's not required. And I definitely think that it should be at least a half-year credit in order to graduate and get your diploma, to just be slightly educated on something in a biology aspect from, yeah.
Thanks for that. Jane has a comment.
I would just make a comment on the idea that the young people see this as scary. I think the older people do too. But sometimes we forget
Jane.
I'm sorry, sometimes we forget that this is really a time of great opportunity. We have to kind of rethink how we do things. We have to rethink our energy systems. We have to rethink really our planning for our communities, our master plans. Everything should consider the fact that the climate is changing. But there's tremendous opportunity in these new fields, tremendous opportunity for startups now that are coming out with ideas, not only for energy and energy transmission, but new apps to help us all think about things differently. And it's really an exciting time for the young people to really get involved in their community, figure out what their community needs, and be leaders in this change.
Valia, are you excited about going through the upcoming climate leadership program at Gloucester High School?
Definitely, yeah. I'm really looking forward to learning new things and being able to have a little bit more knowledge in it myself. Because I was thinking before, I came here, like, oh, I should probably prepare, so I know what I'm talking about, because I know, there's like problems and stuff, but I don't know exactly what there is, and that's sort of what sparked that thought that I wish I was more educated on this, because as a full-time student, I don't really have the time to go off and learn those things on my own, in the depth that I want to, because of all the many other things
that you're doing.
Yeah.
And just a note, the Town Green is sponsoring a climate leadership program at the high schools. It's an optional thing for students to do, but we're really excited about doing that with high school students. From the classroom and the farm to people's backyards, Eric, this one's for you. Biodiversity loss in people's backyards. What aren't they seeing anymore, and what could they do to help?
Well, one thing, and it's not entirely climate-oriented, but it's something that I have to take this opportunity to put it on the table with everybody, but is loss of insects worldwide. Tremendous. How many people remember insects all over your windshield when you traveled somewhere? Anybody seen that any time recently? Not much. Doesn't matter where you go. It's kind of gone. And there's a lot of data sets from all around the world showing drastic reductions. From a food chain perspective, we're at the upper end, and big animals, but really everything matters at that micro level, the insect level. And the one thing that most everyone in this room can do, either support at the municipal level or in your own backyard, is take one small piece of your yard and just put it back to natural wildflowers and grassland and not a mown lawn. You don't have to give up your whole lawn. Just one piece of it. And if the 70 million houses that have a lawn in this country did 10 square feet, do the math. That's bigger than all the national parks combined, just about. It really can be tremendous impact. That's one thing on a large scale that could make a difference. It will make a difference.
Plants, native plants and pollinator gardens and,
And it
any
looks
kind
good.
of wildflowers, native wildflowers.
Moss, yes.
Moss, yes. And moon gardens, also to bring the moths. At first I thought you said moths, but, and moon gardens are a real thing. I'm really fascinated by them. We have time for a couple more questions for the panel, and then I'm going to open it up to our audience. Jane, I'd like for you to talk about sea level rise on Cape Ann. In a little while, we're going to be doing an activity to look at the maps that you brought. But what are the vulnerable sections that you'd like to point out?
Well, I don't think I'll give it away because our little exercise here, I think, will be good for everybody. Everybody was taking a look at these maps when you came in. And I would just say that they're not labeled. And they're not labeled intentionally because I really want you to look closely. We want you to look at the maps closely and try and figure out what you're looking at. These maps are done with 5 feet of sea level rise, which is likely by the end of the century. 5 feet of sea level rise is also the same essentially as storm surge, which will happen sooner when we have storms. But these maps are showing still water at high tide, no wind, no waves, high tide every day at the end of the century. And when you take a look at them, they're really quite dramatic. And they're dramatic because we've experienced sea level rise, and I think you'll all know that, I think you'll all say that you've seen the effects of sea level rise today, depending on where you live and what you do. But the rate of sea level rise is going to accelerate. So that means that in the next 10 years, you're going to see a lot more sea level rise than you saw in the last 10 years. And this, of course, depends on whether we continue burning fossil fuels the way we are today. If we really cut back on it very quickly and transition to non-fossil fuel energy sources, then it might not be as bad as what we're predicting. So unfortunately, there's uncertainty in these predictions because we don't really know what humans are going to do. We don't really know what our country is going to do and other countries. So we also have to be ready to adapt. And like we were talking about for opportunities, the young people and all of this, we do have some time to think about this. We can adapt if we plan, but we can't keep our heads in the sand. We have to take a look at what is this going to look like for our community? Where are the vulnerable areas? What are we going to do about it? With respect to roads, you can make roads stronger. You can make the base layers thicker. You can make the pavement layers thicker. You can take action to adapt to these coming changes. But we need to do it with eyes wide open.
Jane?
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Eric?
I try to do my best to put some things in relationship to what you know here on Cape Ann. For most of you are Cape Anners. And on this topic of sea level rise, it's kind of a question. And you'll know the answer when I kind of throw this question out there. But what do these all have in common? Back Beach in Rockport, Front Beach, Old Garden, Long Beach, Cressy's Beach, Niles Beach, Pavilion Beach, they all have hardened infrastructure right behind them. Beaches are actually as much, biologically, they're not super important from a fisheries perspective. I'm not going to say they are. They are to a social, economic perspective. And our society drives on money. It will continue to, in one form or the other. Those are drivers, major, for people that live here, people that sell things, restaurants, everything. We are likely to lose all those beaches, unless anyone in this room can say how we're not going to. 3 or 4 feet sea level rise, those beaches are gone because they can't go anywhere. We're not going to tear roads out just to get 10 feet of beach. So that's something to really think about, is that social economic part of some of this. It's not just biological. You take away that recreational resource, and Cape Ann's not so fun anymore all of a sudden if you don't have a beach.
Thanks, Eric. Well, now's the time for our Q&A, and we'd like to hear from you both your comments about what you've heard tonight, what you're thinking. Please share with us your thoughts, your emotions, and also your questions. So I apologize that I don't have a mic that can travel, but I can repeat the question if needed.
Would you remind me the name of the person from the solar?
That's Evan Lawler.
I resonated with Evan's talking about all the roofs in Gloucester, particularly the flat roofs of municipal and industrial and commercial spaces that don't have solar on them. I'd like to know what the obstacles are. What is keeping that from happening?
Okay, did everyone hear the question? Okay, just checking. Evan.
I think there's a few obstacles. Obviously, the investment that needs to be made to put it up there. There's also, I think, in Gloucester in particular, there might be a little bit of a hesitancy to put infrastructure on roofs. It's dependent on the condition of the roof, right? You don't want to put it on an old rubber roof that's going to leak. I think Gloucester High School had a major issue where a roof leaked, and major issue there. So the city doesn't want to necessarily put all this infrastructure on the buildings, and then they have to keep up with the roofs, right? How many roofs? I mean, you probably would need to replace 50% of the roofs right away, which is a smart move because then, solar has the panels, the racking, all that stuff has a 25-year warranty on it. So it's one of those things where if the roof's going to last longer than the solar system, then you're in good shape. In 25 years, you can take those panels down and put a much more efficient panel up there, whatever needs to be done, and it makes sense. But I think it's an investment, you know? Where's the money going to come from? What roofs are we going to put it on? Things like that. But that's I think the biggest thing is the money.
Are there inadequate incentives?
There actually are now more incentives for cities and municipal buildings, because at first it was the 30% federal tax credit was only applicable to homeowners or building owners or businesses. But now there's a direct pay is the new thing where they can get a 30% direct payment. So that 30% is now available for a lot more. You know, nonprofits can now do it, churches can do it, different schools can do it, and things like that. So that's starting to ramp up, and then you get things like this REAP grant, which Tucker's doing, which is another huge benefit. But I mean, I've been doing this for 8 years. I've been doing the same work kind of for 10 plus years. And the thing about it is your electrical costs are now so high that your return on investment, you don't need as much of an upfront incentive, because your incentive is your savings. You know, your return on investment has shortened so much because, I mean, this winter, if you're not on an aggregate, you know, third-party provider, you're going to be paying 50 cents a kilowatt hour, which it used to be 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So,
Thanks, Evan. Question, Ellen?
Yeah, we're all talking about Cape Ann and, you know, what's being done to mitigate issues. It takes a lot of money to mitigate all these issues. It also takes legislation. And I'm really not hearing that one of the main things that people have to do is contact your legislators and ask them how you're going to vote in favor of a better environment. Because there's so much politics in any decision that's made, and your legislators have to hear that you're so concerned. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything.
Thanks, Ellen. Question in the back.
Yes, this is kind of along the lines of what Evan was talking about with the solar panels and everything. But so we got a system installed in my home a couple years ago, and we actually had to pay National Grid to have a new brand new transformer installed, and we don't get any benefit besides the just benefit of having solar panels. And now the whole rest of our street has access to that transformer that we basically help pay for. There should be like a grant, or like, I don't know, it seems weird to charge homeowners for a commonly shared electrical system like that.
yeah, we just installed a system last week in Rockport that he had been waiting for his transformer to be upgraded for almost a year, right, Joy? I mean, so, and he had to pay for it. We split the cost with him because, I mean, we don't feel it's right. He needs to pay $3,000 for a transformer. But National Grid also takes their sweet time if it's something like that. If they pop the transformer, they'll be fixed the next day. But if it's a homeowner that's doing it, that's pushing them over the cap, it's because their everybody's infrastructure around here is not good. I mean, a particular part of Rockport, we have 3 transformers that need to be upgraded in that area, because that whole area is just not ready for the expansion that we've had. Whether it's, you know, new buildings, whether it's heat pumps now, so the demand is so high that all the transformers that you see when you're driving around, they're probably ready to go. And the more electric vehicles, and then solar, it's something that the infrastructure needs to be updated. But that's nationwide. I mean, it's an issue.
Thanks. Do you have a follow-up, Clay?
Yeah, what Tucker had mentioned about the cap that National Grid has on single properties. Do you think that has to do with the infrastructure?
Yeah. So there's a 10 kW net metering cap, meaning anything over that number, you don't get 100% of the value of the electricity you produce. You only get wholesale rate. But the state has passed a law to raise that cap, but National Grid and Eversource are like, all right, yeah, we'll raise it when we want.
Right.
So they haven't. And it's been over a year since they passed that, but nothing's happened. So you have a situation like Tucker's where we installed solar on his mom's, and we're at the 10 kW cap, so anything that gets installed from here on out, he only gets, 5 cents a kilowatt hour versus 40 cents a kilowatt hour. And it's partly because National Grid doesn't want everybody throwing up as many panels as they possibly can because their infrastructure can't handle it. And it just means more transformers need to be replaced, more this, more that. So it's going to happen. That's all happening. It has to, especially with electric vehicles. So I don't know what to do to get them to pass that, but people are working on it. Maybe.
A question here in the front.
I just want to have a quick work with Evan, and just in terms of what we can do about that cap, that's part of my job directly. And Maura Healy's office has made a big stand on wanting to improve the infrastructure of the state, and they're not taking into consideration that as they push electrification, they are forcing that on consumers, like you said. And we need to be going to, like she mentioned over there, going
Ellen.
to our legislature, going to the government, going to our local representatives and saying, if you want us to electrify, and we're all gonna collectively do that, then that cannot be on individual homeowners to upgrade the infrastructure. It's just not acceptable. So also, if you live in a community or a neighborhood where more people might be interested, you can also go together at the same time and share that upgrade. It still shouldn't be on homeowners, but it is a way to offset that cost coming to just one person in the neighborhood to go together and just choose to upgrade that together for your benefit of the neighborhood.
Thanks so much. Any other questions? We've got a couple more. Over here, yes.
This is more a comment than a question.
Sure.
I founded and chair an association of bird clubs across Massachusetts, 24. Just kind of follow up on a comment about biodiversity. If you're looking for information about the future of specific birds in Massachusetts, Mass Audubon has published a series of reports that you can find on their website called State of the Birds, and I think they actually have a kind of score for whether different species are declining but the last report they did gives a climate change rating. So species by species, it talks specifically about climate change, how it would affect the birds in our state. There's also national reports.
So that's Mass Audubon's State of the Birds.
Yeah.
And it could be found online? Yeah.
If you Google that, you can find it, Mass Audubon's here.
Great.
I would just quickly add, as far as gardens, bird clubs and garden clubs as well have a wealth of information about how to plant pollinator-friendly gardens. And I think every site would second the comment about if you want birds or other pollinators on your property, forget your lawns.
Plant trees and plant pollinator gardens, right. We'll take a question here first, and then I'll come to you. Lisa.
This one's for Dahlia. Do you think, you were talking about how you haven't received much education about the environment and climate change, and this is just your perception. Do you think if you had been taught, or, at an earlier age, that maybe the culture in your school would be more open to thrifting and saving, what we have and protecting the earth a little more?
Sure. The question is, if Velia had more education during her elementary school years, would she find that there would be a different culture in the high school?
I definitely think that it's I think that it's really hard to influence my age group and up right now because we all sort of trust each other in our own little circle, and it's really hard to have adults, come tell us this information and us feel really motivated to do something with that. So I do think that it's really important to educate younger kids, like elementary school and even maybe middle school, and about those things, because I do think that if I was really educated about it, then I would, and so were all my friends and my peer group and the people around me, I do think it would be a lot easier to get everybody on board to do something or, you know, just have everybody feel more passionate and more motivated to help. Because it is really difficult to influence a really big group of kids who, especially with social media, the advertising that I see constantly all day long for these products that are just so bad for the environment, and, you know, one person buys them and looks good wearing the jeans, or their skin looks really good with this product, and everybody buys it. And it's such a powerful thing that we're like stuck in the middle of, sort of. So I do think it's really important to like get that education at a younger age.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Valia.
Just to jump in real quick, we just installed a solar system with the auto at the high school, and we had them install it, and it was really cool to see these high school kids that were actually putting the panels on, and you know, we were having electricians there, but they were tying it in, and like they could see it work, and they really did like accept it and enjoy doing it, and you could see that they were like, you know, light bulbs going off, being like, oh, this is really cool. Like they could,
Part of the GHS vocational program?
Yep.
That's there. Great. This question here.
I'm a new owner of business in Gloucester, and I heard some interesting history about Rogers Street being mainly landfill. And knowing that I now have the future seafront, maybe 50 years off the beach, on Eastern Ave. So we can imagine that some of the decisions about industry can get undone with the controls involved. For example, I survived 20 years in Baton Rouge. Okay, that's every summer traumatized by what's about to hit you. And you can't get flood insurance anymore. So I'm wondering about the general picture for like business owners, homeowners. Are we looking at protecting the insurance, you know, that we could get? Do we have rights to insurance for flooding? And is there anybody here that could discuss like the future of, you know, are we gonna have Rogers Street become more of a boatway? Like go back to Holland and see how they've managed reclaiming land so that they can have water and sea.
The Netherlands is a very source of solutions. For our panel, Eric, you want to take this, and Jane?
I'll take a little crack at it. The insurance industry is one of the biggest industries in the world. And it's all about money. Purely, it's money. It's just money transferring. You make your cut off of insurance in a big world picture. They have literally thousands of people that work for the insurance industry now that study climate change. They have some of the top-notch people. They're going to be making their decisions, as a private business should, on their rate of return. And that's what's changing. That is going to be one of the big pushes, is you won't be able to afford insurance, many of us, in many locations that we've traditionally thought, I live here, why can't I live here? Why can't I get insurance? Because they're not going to give you insurance, which you've already experienced in Baton Rouge. That's going to be, I mean, you've all seen insurance rates going up. They're going to keep going. The way the climate's changing, as fast as it is with billion-dollar events happening one every week now, I think, in the country, of that nature, of some sort, we're going to see that's going to be a driver. At some point, businesses and residences will simply not be able to stay places unless they have so much money it doesn't matter. Because there's a lot of those, too. A lot of people that live on the coast are people with lots of money, and they don't care if the house burns down because they get enough to just rebuild it. That's another thing to think about. So, anyway.
Is there anything like a nonprofit that would create, you know, like almost like a co-op insurance that we can kind of protect ourselves?
There could, but in the end, even if you did a co-op, it has to at least still have enough income to do the payout that's expected to happen. That's the problem. These impacts are expected to happen over time. So even if you did it corporately, maybe you'd reduce your rate a little bit. Even if you could pull that off, you still have to put enough to compensate for the expected damages that will happen. That's what's going to be a big driver in coastal development and/or coastal retreat is insurances. You won't be able to get insurance.
It's a really good topic, and I feel like Town Green should have something else about it. But I will point you to the towngreen2025.org website and look in videos, because this year we had the Harvard Graduate School of Design hosted Jesse Keenan, who's one of the world's foremost experts in finance and climate finance, but he does talk about the insurance situation, and you can find that on our website. It's called Cape Ann Conversations, and it's with Jesse Keenan.
One other aspect of this, I also spent 15 years in the Bay Area, and I attended a summit, and it was hosted by 5 different districts, and all of the lower socioeconomic regions were in the lowlands.
The lowlands, yeah.
And so we
Yeah.
can see that, up the hill, it's going to be a better investment, and people aren't saying that much to impoverished people who are living in a high-risk floodplain. So it's environmental racism.
Yeah, and it's environmental justice and injustice, really.
I mean, we can keep going on this awful subject, but it's just, I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah, we need to have more conversations about it.
To work it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, do you have a question? It'll be our last question, so we can get our activity in.
Not really a question, it's really this whole notion of communal solar panels. Like, why not have the city have a place, a farm, that has solar panels? I mean, I tried to get solar panels and my roof wasn't big enough to hold enough. And my sun wasn't, hitting the house in the right direction. But my neighbors have a garden, and together we could put solar panels, maybe, enough. I'm just thinking, can't we do this together in some way? Can the city help and, industry, and to put people together who could help each other?
All right, Evan, you have the last word on the panel.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's just getting people to give up space to put solar arrays is going to take a lot, which is why the roofs are the best places, all Gloucester Crossing. I don't know what's on the roofs up there, but I didn't do solar up there. I will if anybody works for Gloucester Crossing. But those are the opportunities that aren't going to also cause people to be in an uproar about, well, you're taking over this piece of land that we could have used for a park or gardens or whatever.
Evan, is there any communities that have successfully stored that energy overnight to redistribute it back to that community?
There are small examples of communities that are creating microgrids that you either put it on the roofs or in an area on the ground, and they store it in batteries and then use that at night. There is opportunity for that. I mean, that's a huge scale thing where, every pole outside isn't owned by us. It's owned by National Grid. Every wire that you see on the street is National Grid's wire. It's not our wire. So it's a huge infrastructure change that would need to happen. Now, can it happen in a smaller condo association or something like that? That would be where you start and figure out how it works in those situations and how you need to run it. But there's just a lot of infrastructure changes that would need to be had,
Thanks, Evan. I'd like to close our panel discussion right now, and we're going to move into our activity. But before we do that, I want to thank Dr. Jane Knott, Eric Hutchins, Valia Rin, Tucker Smith, and Evan Lawler. Thank you so much.